Zinaida Aridova did not live to see the victory over the Nazis for only 3 months. This story is a memoir by a miracle survivor of the women's concentration camp Ravensbrück. What this woman had to go through could not be called other than hell. Before the war, Zinaida's biography was not particularly remarkable. She was born on October 10, 1909 in the family of a worker in Arzamas in Tsarist Russia. In the city of Gorky, she graduated from the medical institute. She worked as a doctor in a polyclinic. In the first days of the war, she volunteered to the front, leaving her mother to bring up her 11-year-old son. In June 1942, Zinaida was captured near Sevastopol, Crimea. At that time, she refused to leave her wounded and evacuate. The Germans drove all captured prisoners to the city of Nikolaev in the south of Ukraine, where there was a huge camp for 60,000 to 70,000 people. There was a hospital where the sick were treated by captive doctors. There were no medicines or instruments. The surgical department had one medical scalpel and a self-made knife made of tin. That was all there was to operate with. Of the drugs, manganese, vaseline, and ichthyol ointment. Instead of sterile materials, there were paper bandages and gauze napkins. Patients lay on the bare floor, at best on an overcoat if they had one. Clothes were removed from the dead and given to the living. There was nothing to wash them with. At the entrance of the hospital, there was a black school blackboard where every day they chalked up the number of the dead. The average figure was 250 to 400 people a day. In January 1943, all the women were removed from the camp to be sent to work in Germany. The wounded or those with physical disabilities were exterminated. At one of the stops, the women heard children's voices and Russian speech. Looking out the only unoccupied window, they saw the same carriage with the children. They were crying, and upon seeing the women, were reaching out to them through the bars. Then the trains parted. In the German town of Soest, everyone was lined up and told that they were now civilians and would be working in factories and mines. One of the women stood up. "We swore an oath to our country and will not break it. None of us will work in German factories." The Germans were furious. Prisoners were lined up on the parade ground. Every 5th prisoner was taken out and beaten. The women sang a Russian song, Holy War. The Germans shouted and fired machine guns, but did not drown out the chorus. Then they shot 10 people. The rest were locked up in a barrack, where they did not feed them for a few days. Then they put them back on the train and sent them to the Ravensbrück women's concentration camp. The Ravensbrück concentration camp infirmary, known as the Revier, was often simply a transit station to death, a place where doctors and nurses conducted horrific experiments and eventually killed sick, weak, and so-called idiots, mentally ill prisoners. There were 1,200 people in the barracks where Zinaida lived. There were 100 rabbits, young and healthy women on whom German doctors conducted experiments. There were 3 floors of bunk beds. On them were mattresses made of burlap and stuffed with shavings. Punishments followed for any misconduct. A wrong sleeve number sewn on, a boot that had come off without permission, a shirt washed without permission could be hit in the face with a brass knuckle. In addition to women, there were children in the camp. One of the surviving prisoners, Elizaveta Novitskaya, told of them. The SS men with sticks chased a crowd of women and children from 3 to 5 years old past our barracks. The children were led to an empty barracks. The women were tearing at them, the children were screaming. The female guards worked with their lashes and then let the dogs down, sparing no effort. Suddenly, a boy of about 5 jumped out of the window of the barracks and ran to his mother. The warder hit him with the lash. The boy fell down, then got up on his knees and still crawled to his mother. The warder ran up to the child and kicked him until he fell silent. She kicked him for a long time until she broke into a sweat. The child had been lying unconscious for a long time, but she kept beating. We helped the children in any way we could. We gave them an extra slice of bread or a potato. After they were released, many of them adopted the children. Zinaida ended up working on the sand. She had to carry heavy sacks of wet sand and crushed stone. After work on the inspection, people would drop dead. In August 1944, Zinaida was put in the infamous Revier in Barrack 10, with a temperature of almost 40 degrees. She was given a bet card, a card giving her temporary release from work and the opportunity to lie in a decent bed in the camp infirmary. The wound on her throbbing head was bandaged with a corrugated paper bandage. She was given some aspirin. Next to Zinaida, on the same mattress, lay 2 other women. The first, Valentina Vers, lay completely naked on a straw mattress that smelled of moldy dampness. Her glassy eyes stared into the distance. Her yellow lips mumbled some incomprehensible sound. The other woman, Kachivalko, lay motionless with a piece of bedclothes over her head. Now she laughed. Now she wailed loudly. She was mad. Suddenly, Katya, the prisoner, pulled the dirty bandage off her face and, leaning on her elbow, raised her head. One eye was a black gaping hole. The other was a brownish, rotting orbit, the eye looking all around. She looked at Zinaida with pleading eyes and asked, "I know, I look terrible, but I'm still alive." Soon, Aridova was transferred to work in the camp hospital. Russians had to be doctors, nurses, and cleaners. There were specialists working nearby who could not be called doctors. They were sadists. History has preserved their names. They were the chief physician, Percy Trite, and the head nurse, Elizabeth Marshall. In 1944, Himmler visited the camp. He gave the order to destroy all the sick who were unable to move around. The doomed were given a pink ticket, which officially meant exemption from work. Unofficially, a crematorium or a gas chamber. It was enough for Dr. Trite to make a diagnosis with gray hair or swollen feet. Elizabeth Marshall was a woman in her 60s with a good-natured face. She starved young children, forbade changing the linen of patients with festering wounds, pushed naked into the rain patients with pneumonia. And in these conditions, Aridova treated people. Treated not so much medicine, which in fact did not exist, as a kind word and care. Zinaida contrived to get the right drugs through foreign doctors who were treated better than the Russians. With their help, she forged certificates of exemption from work. Before the selection, the mass extermination of the weakened prisoners, she hid them in the secluded places of the barracks in an attempt to save at least some of them from death. The selection was conducted once a month. The weak ones were sent to a separate barracks. There, the female death row inmates served a funeral service for themselves, a mocking parody of the Orthodox rite. Candles were lit, and the prisoners were forced to sing psalms to the harmonica and violin. Then they were taken to the gas chamber. Aridova did not work at the hospital for long. To improve productivity, the camp introduced cash bonuses for percussionists who worked well in the factories. Zinaida defiantly refused money. "I work for other prisoners, and I don't need your handouts," she told the guards. She was beaten and sentenced to 55 lashes. No healthy man could have withstood such punishment. Along with her, all the Soviet prisoners and Serb partisans refused to pay bonuses. The chief doctor hurried to get rid of Zinaida and sent her to the aircraft factory in Bart. The work there was very hard. Before leaving, Aridova swore to her friends that she would not work for the Germans. At the plant, she and 40 others did just that. They were put against the wall and forced to stand motionless for 3 days, then put in a punishment cell. According to the International Convention, I am a prisoner of war and cannot work in the manufacture of armaments. Zinaida Aridova told the camp commandant. "You remember the convention," he answered, grabbed Zina by the throat and began to strangle her. "Then I will make you forget your own name." Zina was sent back to the punishment cell. From there, she was led daily on a chain into the workshop and tried to sit down on the assembly line. She pushed herself back with the last of her strength. This went on for several days. Zinaida became apathetic and gloomy. She was tired of struggling. In the night of February 15 to 16, 1945, Zinaida got out of the barracks and threw herself on the barbed wire, along which the current ran. After the end of the war and the trial of the Nazis, it became clear that Zinaida had saved 45 people from the gas chamber at Ravensbrück camp. They were 45 souls who were able to live on, give birth to children, and thank their fate for deliverance. Zinaida was the seed that produced the fruit of 45 lives.